It's 11 a.m. Central Time. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today, and I'm super excited to share it all with you all. As a reminder, this is being recorded. So for those who registered and aren't able to make it or missed a presentation they were hoping to catch, you can catch that later. We'll send that out to all of the registrants. Uh, Feel free to pop in the chat and say hi. Let us know who's here. You can also at any point put questions into the chat. The way this will work is I will toss this to a student fellow to present about a project or two that they worked on this summer. And then after that, we will leave some time after each presentation for questions. So at that point, you'll feel free to put things in the chat, raise your hand, and they can answer questions directly from you. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen in a second here. All right. Is everyone seeing the presentation screen?
Yep, you're good.
Fabulous. So before we get started, a quick note about the Student Innovation Fellowships. So these fellowships are 12 weeks during the summer from about mid-May to mid-August. These 5 students applied way back in the fall of last year, and then once we selected students, we pair them with newsrooms who also apply for a student fellow based on what those students' skills are, what their interests are, and what that newsroom is looking for. The key to the Student Innovation Fellowship is that these are not traditional internships. These students are not reporting or editing or producing videos or audio stories. They are doing something that is innovative for that newsroom. And that is still a broad task. They can work on anything as long as it is supporting the newsroom trying something new. So that can range from social media strategies to audience engagement and distribution to even something on the business side. So each of our students have worked on different projects this summer. Again, based on what they were interested in and based on what the newsroom they were paired with was looking for. And then when they finish those projects, they write about them and share all the practical tips, the lessons learned from those projects on RJI's website. And we'll also spotlight some of them in the Innovation and Focus newsletter. We're all about being transparent, sharing templates, sharing how much things cost, sharing what went well, what we still have yet to learn. So each of our students are going to be talking a little bit more about that. At the end of the presentation, I can also answer any questions about the fellowship in general, but the applications for next summer do open in October, which will be here before we know it. So we'll continue to share out more information on how to apply after that. But let's go ahead and get started. First up, we have Audrey Novinger. Audrey worked with Next City this summer, and she's going to share a little bit about what she did during her fellowship. Go ahead, Audrey.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Emily. Yes, my name is Audrey. I worked with Next City this summer, and Next City is a nonprofit newsroom. And we worked on a couple of projects to collect impact stories from Next City's readers. And my mentor, Deanna Anderson, is the editorial director at Next City. And we received some really useful results from the surveys that we sent out to collect impact stories. So moving on to the next slide. Yes, this is just a little bit of background about Next City. Next City is a nonprofit newsroom that covers urban policy and centers marginalized voices in its solutions-based reporting. And as part of our impact projects, we wanted to understand how readers were using Next City's journalism in their work. We knew from like the 2020 reader survey that they conducted that 75% of their readers rely on Next City's reporting in their careers, and nearly 90% said that their work brings about greater racial equity. So we knew that what they were doing was like really important, and we just wanted to collect some more concrete examples, especially like in anecdotal form from readers. So moving on to the next slide. The first project that we worked on was to improve the existing impact survey. which was created using Google Forms. And so far, this survey had received one response. And so Deanna and I decided to make the question fields optional as our first step because we realized that like maybe some people were not answering all of the questions or just felt like they may not want to respond or include their email in like some of those fields. And I think that was a really good call because definitely that helped us get some more responses. And so in addition to making those fields optional, we also brainstormed some additional questions that asked where people were based and also how we could improve our journalism. And we shared this survey via social media and our newsletter. And so that just kind of helped push it out to like a broader audience. And after we did this, we received 22 responses in about a week. So that was a really, really good response rate. And I should also mention, as part of this project, we had interviewed some other newsrooms, other nonprofit newsrooms, like the Marshall Project and Trade-Offs and Borderless Magazine, which we included those interviews in the first RJI article we published. And we spoke to them just kind of about their process for collecting impact data. And these newsrooms gave us some like really helpful ideas that kind of helped us like develop questions for our survey and also kind of gave us ideas for our second project to help us kind of communicate and analyze what we found out. And so in our second project, this was also impact related, so kind of an extension of the first project. We revisited Next City's mission and values to kind of help us identify what was impact worthy to us. Because one of the things we talked about with other newsrooms was how impact looks very different and is unique depending on what your newsroom's goals are and just like what type of newsroom you are. And so that was kind of our first step, was just looking at what Next City wanted to accomplish. And we received some really beneficial responses as to how a variety of people use Next City's journalism. We had several people say that Next City is their go-to source for news about urban policy. We also had people comment that like they regularly cite Next City and even share its work with colleagues. And it was also really interesting. We had someone who's a professor and said they use Next City's work in college classrooms. So Next City is definitely like having an impact and resonating with a lot of people in a lot of different professions. And even with just the 22 responses we received, we could see that we had readers from across the US, like in the Midwest, we had readers in cities like on both coasts, and even a few out of the country. And so we sort of concluded this project with a plan to help Next City continue thinking about impact. And so we outlined in this like kind of last slide, we outlined sort of our next steps. So after the interviews that we conducted with the other newsrooms, we decided that we wanted to push our survey on an annual basis in the future, just to remain consistent and also gather like unique responses each year. And we are planning to continue to reach out to some of the sources who responded to our first survey just to request permission so we can actually use their responses like more formally, like in an impact report, and possibly like publish on the website. And actually yesterday we sent out another survey to institutional members at Next City just to get some more perspectives. And we also, something we learned from other newsrooms that we talked to in our first project is to like kind of find a way for all of the staff members to start thinking about impact on a more regular basis. And actually like almost all the ones we talked to said that they used Slack to kind of brainstorm ideas for projects. Also like there were a lot of newsrooms that talked about citing like examples of impact from other like sources that they thought were kind of inspirational. And so Deanna created a Slack channel specifically for impact, and that's already being used. I've seen like some really good examples just that I think will be really helpful in the future. And so far that's just really helped kind of, I think, encourage everyone to think about impact like just in their day-to-day work, regardless of like if they're like an editorial on the editorial side or a writer. And so, yeah, that's kind of an overview of just how we began thinking about impact and really sort of started collecting some of these stories kind of from scratch. We had some things started before that, but yeah, that's kind of an overview. And so if anyone has any questions, I guess I'll now open that up.
Great. Thank you so much, Audrey. I pulled up the QR code and link to Audrey's story. Kat also put it in the chat. A lot of these students have published their first piece, and their second piece will be publishing very soon. So you can keep an eye out for those. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand, unmute, or put it in the chat. All right, some great feedback.
Mhm.
Everyone is just praising how cool of a project this is, Audrey. Randy has a question for you, Audrey. Has Next City used any of the impact stories they've collected, or do they have plans maybe to use some of these anecdotes that you were collecting?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's something like definitely that's kind of our next steps is to like reach out to some of the people who responded and like get, permission. And I've definitely seen in the past, like, I mean, Deanna could probably speak to this, even more than I could, but like, we've seen examples of some stories being used already, but I think the plan is to use some of these like anecdotes we've collected. Um, like in an impact report or even like highlighting these quotes like on the website. So yes, that's definitely part of the kind of the next steps.
Great. Giannis also says
Oh, yeah,
we're planning to include some stories when we present it to potential funders. So
yes.
I think I have learned from working on impact reports that it often overlaps with different goals, whether you're communicating to your audience, to your community of the impact of your work, whether it's related to funders, individual funders, or bigger sponsors. And I imagine that's been kind of the case for you all too, Audrey.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely like I've seen like so far, even like especially these interviews we conducted with some of the other newsrooms, I can see how like impact and like the responses we collect and also that data is like really useful to like in a lot of different sections for nonprofits. Um, and so yeah, there's definitely, and that's also kind of the benefit of using the Slack too, is like a lot of different people can kind of like communicate and talk about how impact is useful to them in like ways that we maybe hadn't like really thought about before.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, definitely.
great. All right. Thanks so much, Audrey. Now, passing it off to Colin Rhodes, who was with 100 Days in Appalachia this summer.
Hi
Colin?
everyone. Hi everyone. My name's Colin. I worked at 100 Days in Appalachia, and my project was increasing Instagram reach. So at the beginning, I just want to go over why we chose Instagram and kind of a snapshot of their initial social presence. If you go to the next slide. So they didn't use socials really that much at all. They had 2,000 newsletter subscribers. That was their like baseline audience at the beginning. This is a snapshot of like the age ranges of them. So 28% of them are aged from 25 to 44 in Appalachia. Most of them are women. And then we can go to the next one. Sorry, I'm going to go quick. They only gave me 5 minutes. So why Instagram? Again, 60% of our Instagram users are 18 to 34, which lines up with our potential Instagram audience, which we talked about on the last slide. Instagram also praises visual content, which we'll talk about more later, but just keep that in mind as we go through. So Instagram at the beginning, I guess like social platforms at the beginning as well, they barely got any engagement on Facebook. They posted on Instagram 1 to 2 1 to 2 posts a month, sporadically. There was no really like consistency to it. They weren't like posting every story that went up on their website. They weren't doing newsletter promotions. They weren't doing any of that stuff. 500 accounts reached in the past 2 months, and they only had 5,040 followers. So deciding what to change. How are we going to get more reach on Instagram? So the first thing we did is do some competitor analysis. This isn't necessarily our competitors, but rather people who are playing the Instagram game and who are playing it well and who are winning it. Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. These accounts have millions of followers. They get millions of engagements, millions of reach, whatever. So we thought if we could mimic anything that they sort of do, then our reach would increase as well. So they put text over images. They put the whole story on Instagram. People don't like leaving the Instagram app, so they don't. So this is how these newsrooms get so much engagement. And on the right is just an example of a story. We wanted to do stories as well. And then we can go to the next one. So this was very reassuring for my editor when I pitched this to her. This isn't rocket science. This isn't animations. This is just text on a black screen. That's really all it is. The middle one is literally just a story that I'm not sure that I think, yeah, the Washington Post did, and it's just a picture of Trump with the headline right over it. It's very simple. The right one is literally just a white background with text over it. So again, very reassuring, it just made it seem easy for her as we move forward. So what we changed, carousels, we wanted to use carousels. Again, put the whole story on Instagram. People don't like leaving the app. We made a content calendar. I took charge of this content calendar because this was just an easy way for me to kind of articulate what I wanted to happen on Instagram, when I wanted posts to go up, how I wanted them to go up, what hashtags to use, notes and other stuff like that, so they could just easily get my feedback. I wanted a newsletter promotion every week, and I wanted 2 cultural analysis posts a week. That was our goal, I guess. Or that's, I guess, what we did through the summer. We wanted every post to include some sort of visual elements when applicable, because again, Instagram, create shareable content. And we also identified that most of their good content or their well-performing content had some sort of Appalachian pride to it. So we wanted to incorporate that as well. And then obviously use hashtags. So all that fun stuff. Okay, so here's just some examples of our top performing posts. These are our 2 best posts ever, not just over the summer. These were up over the summer, but they're the 2 best posts that the account has ever seen. Exploring trans and queer identity on the left. This was actually a photo essay, and it had some Appalachian pride to it, so it was perfect. There's so many visual elements. There's like 5 pictures we chose from. We put the text on the screen, like we said. It was perfect. The one on the right is about JD Vance being the vice presidential elect. It's very controversial in Appalachia. His memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, is not well received by the Appalachian community. So this was a very controversial, timely piece that we wanted to get up at the end of the week, like it says. And then again, includes some sort of visual element. This one didn't have any pictures, but I just slapped a picture of the mountains behind it and called it a day. So Appalachian pride, visually appealing, carousel, an entire story. No, you're good. You're fine. So again, the whole story on there. I'm done being shocked that JD Vance is making political moves for his own benefit, but I'm not done shouting back, challenging the false idea of some sort of unified Appalachia. That one got a lot of engagement. I think 4 people actually reposted that to their own story. So again, this is very shareable. Reposting is good. It helps the algorithm. Yeah, moving on. So we also wanted to do stories. This is just a good like kind of package deal for your account to have. The stories look nice and pretty. They have from the newsletter at the top, it's got our logo. It has subscribe here at the bottom. You can link out. Yeah, we did these sporadically. Or I guess not sporadically. We did them, I think we did them 2 to 3 times a week. We promoted other stories. We also promoted our newsletter. They didn't do as well as the cultural analysis pieces. And we'll talk more about that at the end, but yeah, still good to have for the account. So results, this is how everything shook up at the end. So since June 4th, when we started our increased effort, we got almost 40,000 impressions, 277 new followers. This is probably more now in the past weekend. 20,000 accounts reached, 2,600 interactions, 53 link clicks, and 20 posts and 16 stories. The activity is a really big part here. Obviously, you're going to post more, you're going to get more reach, you're going to get more impressions. The kind of dead flat line from April to June 9th is the 2 months prior, and then after that is June 4th, and that's where you see the spike of our increased effort. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. So main takeaways: post timely and visually appealing content, Appalachian pride, and focus on cultural analysis pieces. So as we looked over the analytics at the very end, we kind of noticed that the cultural analysis pieces were doing the best. They were outperforming the newsletter promotions, or I guess really any other content we were doing. So I made it a very big point for them to try to get a cultural analysis piece. That's what we call our stories. Try to get a story promotion, I'll call it, up every Sunday. And yeah, that is me. I'll open up for questions. But thank you all for listening, coming to my TED Talk.
Thanks so much, Colin. While we wait for people to put any questions in the chat or to raise their hand, I did have one question for you. When a lot of this was about choosing what kinds of posts and how to post on Instagram, right? So did you end up creating any templates that they can reuse for these kinds of cultural analysis pieces, or were there any tools that were helpful when you did this?
Yeah, they had I forget what it's called, a shared team on Canva. So that was the first thing I did actually, was create a template for their culture analysis piece. And I also created a newsletter promotion piece, a newsletter promotion template that they used, and I think they still use. It's a pretty simple template. If you want to go back, we can look at it. But yeah, that one. This is just a big quotation graphic. Nothing too crazy, but it's pretty easy to slot in text here, and as well with other pictures. So yes, I did make templates for them.
Any other questions for Colin about Instagram strategy and growing your reach on Instagram? All right. Oh, there is a hand raised. Let's see. All right. I think I've given you permission to talk, Randy.
Hey, Colin. Do you think that the cultural analysis, the stories, did better than the newsletter promotions because the whole story was there?
Yes, I do. That is something that I kind of wanted to pitch to them. I guess I really did pitch to them. So midway through the summer, at the beginning, we just had we didn't have any of the newsletter content on Instagram. We just had the newsletter promotion. All it said was, come read our newsletter. That's all it said. And then halfway through, I suggested that we make a carousel of those as well and put some of the newsletter content in the newsletter promotions. And we did do that, but we didn't actually have that much success with it. So yes, I do think that, and we did test with that, but it actually didn't really end up meaning too much, if that makes sense, if that answers your question. I do think that our cultural analysis pieces are the strongest part of our newsroom, for lack of a better term. So they really resonated more with our audience, maybe than the newsletters did.
Another question in the chat. What kind of direct feedback, if any, did you hear back from followers or readers about these changes? Did you hear anything after
I
increasing?
wish. I wish. That's a great question. No, we didn't. So we did get a lot more comments, shares, reposts, than we did before the increased effort, but none of the comments were about how we were posting or like strategy of posting. They were more so, yelling at JD Vance in the comics or in the comments. stuff like that, you know, like normal Instagram comment sections. But no, nothing from our followers of our increased effort.
That could be an interesting next step to see if you could get some feedback from followers eventually.
I
what
I
that might look like.
wonder, yeah, I just wonder if people noticed, really.
Yeah, more engagement is good feedback too. That's a good point.
Yes,
Awesome.
yes, it definitely is.
All right. Thank you so much, Colin.
Yep, thank you.
All right, moving on to Scout Hudson, who worked at the Hechinger Report this summer. Scout, I will toss it to you.
Yeah, hello. So I was able to work with the Hechinger Report. They're a nonprofit newsroom covering innovation and inequality in education. And I was able to work with my mentor, Nicole Dolbo, and then also Noble Ingram. So my projects all kind of focused on rethinking their translation strategy and the outreach and engagement involved with their language projects. So my first big project, I worked on translating two tools, the first of which was the tuition tracker, which allows students to track the historical price data of what their college is advertising for the cost versus what students actually pay. You can filter by like demographic, by success outcome, that sort of thing. It's a super well-performing tool for us. It has about 2.8 million views per year and almost a 7-minute average engagement time. So we knew a lot of people were coming to this tool. And then if you go to the next slide, it works pretty similar to the offer letter decoder. With this one, students can upload their financial aid letter and it decodes it to, say, oh, this is an unsubsidized zone. That's what this means for you as a student or for, you as a parent. And we had noticed that a lot of these tools were part of students' curriculum or uploaded to counselors' office websites or even linked to university financing college how-to pages. So we saw that there was a big demand for these tools, but these tools were not reaching a really big and really growing population of students and families, which are families with limited English proficiency, or students who are English language learners or have a native proficiency in Spanish. So these two tools, if you go to the next slide, please. I did the full translation and we worked with a copy editor to make sure all of those translations were nice and clean. And then we wanted to partner these tools with outreach. So we talked with some nonprofits that are working either in higher education, personal finance, family support, working directly with Latino and Hispanic communities to learn how this tool could be made better and more accessible, and then ultimately working to partner with them to see if they can push these out to their channels, allowing these tools to hopefully reach more students. And then if we go to the next slide. So the second project I worked on is a bit different from the first project. I like to think about the first project as kind of growing Hechinger's audience when it comes to language strategy, and this one is going deeper with our current established audience. So we published a story, a small town needed more Spanish language childcare. Here's what it took. This was in partnership with Palabra, and it worked to, it showed the kind of this discrepancy between a small town that had a really growing population of people who were speaking Spanish and wanted culturally accessible and appropriate childcare, and then how this town came together through nonprofits to meet that need. So after the story was published, we circled back with some of the key players from the story and just asked them really explicitly, like, what information gaps still exist in your community, or how could news help you fill these gaps? What do you wish you knew as a person in X position? And we found out, contrary to our initial plan, because we had initially thought of trying to do some sort of outreach strategy for people who are wanting to get their childcare license but might not be able to because of language barriers. But between these nonprofits, there was a bunch of communication barriers, and they weren't able to connect with other nonprofits working outside of their direct jurisdiction, that was the larger, more pressing information need. So we ended up tying that to doing an explainer. So we asked these nonprofits, like, what do you wish you knew? And we turned those into questions that formatted the structure of the explainer piece, which will hopefully be coming out next week. And we're tying that explainer to a webinar, kind of like this, where people in these nonprofit sectors can talk, can get to know each other more, can connect, hopefully work together to addressing these childcare gaps and these licensing barriers. All right, so kind of main takeaways. First up is new and existing audiences. So my two projects kind of had those two prongs of widening an audience versus engaging more deeply with an audience. And I think looking at how you can tailor your projects to take one of those two ways can really help focus your efforts instead of just trying to do both at the same time, really connecting authentically with those two groups in their own way. It feels a lot more successful. And then next up, listening leads design. with all of our products, we didn't want to, shove a product out there and hope it would work. We wanted to talk with people who would be using these products to make sure it actually worked for them and actually met their needs. And having some sort of feedback mechanism through the design and like the final stage. That way people can continue to talk about these and, you can continue to tinker with those as you recognize new needs, or if it's failing to meet needs, you can reassess. And then finally, it's always good to take a partner to buddy up. So what we learned a lot of the way is, especially as a nonprofit newsroom, collaborating with other nonprofits, even outside of the news sphere, feels really, really helpful and feels like you can really get a much bigger reach for your work. All right, so that's everything. I will turn it over to questions. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Scout. Feel free again, raise your hand, put something in the chat. I did have one question for you, Scout. You mentioned that you created a feedback loop. What did that look like? Was that on the explainer that you were mentioning?
I mean, it was pretty, low tech. It was mostly just asking people like, what do you think about this? Or like, is this something you'd be interested in? Like in those meetings, they're like, I wish we, had a way of talking with people. Would be like, oh, well, do you think an event would be helpful? I do. Okay, what would you want to see in that event? And as we were writing the explainer, like emailing these people like, hey, here's kind of what I'm thinking for the story. Does this like seem helpful to you? Do you have anything you'd want to see in there that I haven't thought of? That sort of thing.
Great, cool. Then we have another question in the chat from James. For the tuition tracker and the offer letter decoder, what actions did you end up doing because of your outreach to the Latino Hispanic communities for those tools?
Yeah, so initially with Tuition Tracker, we weren't sure if we would be able to do a full translation of it. So we thought about doing these like language compatible guides. So it'd be a PDF you could download that would have like, every screen you would encounter on the Tuition Tracker. And then on the side would be like, okay, like this means this in Spanish. Here's how you navigate an English interface in your native language. And that was exciting because we could, maybe expand it to more languages. Like we wanted to do maybe some of the other languages that English language learners are more commonly speaking in public school systems, but after speaking with a lot of nonprofits, especially in education, we learned that that created a pretty big accessibility barrier and that we'd probably be helping more people by focusing on Spanish and doing the full tool instead of trying to cast a wider net, but not as helpful of a net.
I think that also connects a little bit to Randy's question of how did you decide when to widen that reach and really focus on bringing in new audiences versus more deeply engaging with your existing audience? And you touched on this a little bit, that both projects had kind of different goals when it came to that. But how did you kind of figure that out when you were approaching these projects?
I mean, yeah, we just took it really case by case. Coming in, so we have Hechinger and Espanol, which is where we were doing like rote translations of articles, posting those to the web, but those weren't getting very high engagement. Like our time on screen was like less than half of their English counterparts on Spanish copies. And we also knew that when these pieces were getting translated, they were adding 1,000+ words to that final copy, just of how English to Spanish translation works. So we knew that establishing an internal audience wasn't necessarily working for our Spanish language content. And it felt like we might be able to have more benefit and more service communities if we met them where they were at, instead of trying to cultivate our own community of Spanish readers initially. Like that would, I think, be a really great long-term goal. But it felt like meeting these people where they needed service and then inviting them in, as opposed to inviting them in and then trying to meet them where they need service, felt like the much more feasible and helpful thing to do.
Great. And then one other question in the chat has to do with how you balanced your high-tech versus low-tech solutions for these projects. So with the analysis, the outreach, how you were engaging audiences, you kind of had a variety of, maybe with the first two tools, they were a little bit more of a technical solution versus maybe writing an explainer and hosting a webinar might be a little bit more low tech. So how did you now navigate that? How did you balance that high tech versus low tech?
Yeah, I luckily had a lot of help making those discernments from Nikki and Noble, who I worked with most closely at the Hechinger report. but really just case by case. I think the initial plan for tuition tracker of those language compatible guides was pretty low tech, but that just wasn't what made the most sense for the project. So a high tech solution, working in Python and CSS made a lot more sense for those tools. Whereas for the explainer, maybe we could have done something like a big database of all the federal policy, but that didn't seem like that would be helpful because it feels like people in that industry, they know how to Google what a certain grant is, but they need to see that information parsed down into a way it makes sense, and they need that connection element. So it really just felt like looking at how people who need that information would best access that information and how we could uniquely give them that information, and then kind of seeing what tools fit best for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I echo Noble. Great work, Scout. Thanks so much for answering those questions and for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Oops. I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened. Preview. All right. So next up, we have Jada Glass. Jada Glass worked with the Defender Network, the Houston Defender, and she is going to tell you all about the projects that she worked on this summer. Take it away.
Hi, my name's Jada. So you can go ahead to that next slide. So just a little about me. I'm an upcoming senior at the University of Missouri. I'm studying journalism with an emphasis in strategic communications. And like Emily said, my fellowship partner for the summer was the Houston Defender, which is Houston's leading Black news source. And their goal is to educate, empower, entertain, and deliver news and information to the Black community. And then here I just included the Defender's mission statement, which is we represent, engage, amplify, and deliver news and information to the Black audience in the greater Houston area. So just to start with some of my summer projects, the first project I worked on was a high school sports TikTok strategy. The goal was to just expand their audience on TikTok through high school sports because that's one of their most prominent features, and their audience is present on TikTok due to it being, of course, high school students. So for that, we just created a campaign that had kind of 3 different angles that focused on pre-game day preparation. It was just kind of a fun feature for them to be a part of. And there was an addition for the players, one for the coaches, and then one for the fans. And then the most recent project I've worked on is the Facebook community photo highlight, which, yeah, you can go to the next slide. It was a contest using Facebook's targeted advertising to specifically reach the age group of 35 and older. And it was more than just like a contest or a competition. It was a celebration of local creativity and a platform for community engagement. And it was run exclusively on Facebook, and it's a contest that invites community members to share their unique perspectives and artistic expressions through photography. And we specifically focused on Facebook because in the past, the Defender's Facebook had little to no interaction. Like a lot of posts may have like 2 or 3 likes, if any. And I just kind of thought, what better way to get people to interact than to make them feel seen and noticed. So I thought that the contest would just be a good way for them to gain exposure, and it gave an opportunity to highlight overlooked talent within the community. So it just provided a platform to encourage and celebrate creativity of its members. So with this, we utilize Facebook's targeted advertising simply because since interaction was so low on Facebook, I think the main concern was like, well, what if people don't see it, don't really look at it, and don't notice it? In the past, the Defender didn't really use Facebook's targeted advertising. So we decided to kind of start with a small investment at $3 a day. And this would run for a 3-week promotion. So the total investment was $63. And here's just some of the graphics that I created to be featured on social media. So the print on the left is just the square post for Instagram, and the one on the right is a story post. And like in the little blank space, it'll include the link. So for people to enter the contest or submit their entry, they could just click the link. And I created a Google form that made it really simple and easy for them to just access, and they can submit their photo there. And then on all of the forms, I also included an opportunity to sign up for their newsletter in their email, just so they can gain as much like first party data as possible. And it just gives people an opportunity to say like, hey, like this is a organization who's supporting like, me and my talent. So it just gives people the opportunity to see more of the Defender and sign up for their weekly newsletter. So this is just a little overlook of the project timeline. So the first stage was initiation and promotion. So that lasted a week. Well, that would last a week before the entries began. Then the entries would be open for 2 weeks. And then as far as the selection process, there will be 10 photos selected to be voted on. But besides that, there were still photos that we will be choosing just to highlight anyway, because we just want the opportunity to show appreciation to as many like supporters as possible, rather than just highlighting one person or one photo. Like I'm sure there's going to be many photos worthy of being spread across the community. So one photo will be highlighted on its own, and the rest of the photos would be put together in a video across social media platforms just to be showcased to the rest of the community. And so as far as the next steps, everything is kind of formatted to be reused. So you can go ahead to the next slide if you like. Yeah, so I left the Defender with 2 voting forms. One of them was specifically for voting, and then one was for entries of the photos. And then I also left them with 6 Canva templates. There's 2 for Instagram, 2 for Facebook, and 2 for print, because they have a digital newsletter that they send out. There's a weekly one, there's a daily one. So there's just a lot of different versions of them. But I left Canva templates for that as well, to where, for example, if they wanted to do another contest in October and do like best Halloween costume or best Christmas tree or decorations, they could easily reuse the templates and make it kind of a seasonal thing, so where they can keep doing it and it wouldn't just be a one-time thing. So overall, the community photo highlight is an initiative that empowers local artists and strengthens community ties. And it just showcases Houston's vibrant culture through the lens of its talented residents. And it just creates a more celebrated and connected society. So you can go to the next slide. We do not yet have the results, but you can keep an eye out for my article published by RJI, and hopefully there will be results featured in that. Thank you.
Just a comment for Jada. Just someone had said in the chat here that they love this. What a way to highlight community members and also bring the Defender to new audiences. And templates is always a smart idea. Great work, Jada. And that's what I love about it too, is that it's replicable. That's often what we're trying to do with these student innovation fellowships, with the innovation and focus series as well, is how can we try something over a short period of time, learn from it, and then make it something that can help in the long run. So I love that you were thinking about that, Jada. Great. Does anyone have any other questions for Jada? Feel free to put them in the chat to raise. Oh, it does look like someone has their hand raised. Let's see. All right, go ahead, Randy.
So Jada, I'm going to try to extend the amount of time you get to talk. I think the Facebook, the community photo idea is terrific. Can you just talk about for a minute or two about the TikTok project?
So for TikTok, high school sports is like the Defender's most popular platform. It gets the most recognition. And actually on Instagram, it's the main category that they feature. But they kind of, because it's the most popular, they just kind of wanted to spread to a new platform. So we went to TikTok, and TikTok is really full of trends, and like that's just a big thing about it. It's full of trends. So we made a trend with the hashtag, and it was like their Defenders game day preparation. And it just showed how, like I said, there were 3 features. So it was coaches, players, and then fans. So it just gave people the opportunity to like show how they get ready for a game. And this is actually something that'll be featured in the fall, because that's when their fall sports will begin. But so it'll be like a behind the scenes thing for the coaches and then the players, and then for the fans, they can just actively show how they prepare for a game, what they do, how they support their players and the people on the field. So yeah, it's just like a fun trend for them to take part of, just to show how they prepare for a game. And then part of the feature was like kind of going from school to school to highlight them. And so when one school sees it, they'll be like, oh, like that's kind of cool. I want to be featured on the Defender. And so other schools will have the opportunity to reach out and be featured on the TikTok as well.
Yeah, I love how the two projects are kind of connected in that way of how can we get people excited about being featured in the Houston Defender and to participate on some level. So I wonder too if there's a way to make that even collaborative for that fall sports plan. Like if you have local athletes that want to do a takeover or something like that as well, that could be helpful. Kat also put in the chat that we have lots of other TikTok strategies and templates. For Jada's project, she pulled together a script, sort of an outline for each video that she had planned, and so that's really useful. We also have a guide that the Innovation and Focus team worked on with Afro LA to kind of set some guidelines around branding and best practices for TikToks to help boost their TikTok strategy. So if you're looking for that, you can find that in our newsletter. We'll be featuring Jada's project in that newsletter too, coming out on Thursday. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jada. Really appreciate all your work. All right. Now, last but not least, we have Sky Lucas, who worked with the markup this summer, and she's going to share more about what she did. So, Sky, all yours.
Thank you, Emily. Hey, everyone. My name is Sky Lucas. I'm a graduate student studying journalism. And often in my master's program, I find myself thinking about the dynamic between the press and social media. And I got to explore this dynamic firsthand as an audience journalist through the fellowship with the Markup, which has since merged with Cal Matters. So about the experiment, next slide, yes. So we wanted to use social media platforms to further the reporting efforts of the newsroom. Specifically, this meant not just broadcasting our story broadly, but actively seeking a rapport with users who may be most impacted by a report like this. So we devised an engagement strategy to accompany the Markup's latest investigation, seen here. And here, the Markup and Outlier Media found major insurance companies in Michigan charging higher prices in places where more Black people lived, especially in Detroit. And this is really crucial in like reporting facts. And so if people aren't aware of this, does it really matter? So next slide, please. So we wanted to drive the impact of that reporting, and we devised an experiment that would rely on a comment strategy on social media. So the Markup's presence on TikTok is small. It only has about 104 followers, 10 TikToks on the social media platform. Still, TikTok is a huge go-to for many people around the world. But for a less resourced nonprofit newsroom like the Markup and others like it, there is less flexibility to invest the time, energy, and people required to create high-quality productions like you would see from the Washington Post. Likewise, creating and nurturing a community on Reddit seemed like a lot of work for too little benefit. So how could we leverage the platform to broaden the newsroom's reach without needing to create high-quality production TikToks, possibly through a comment strategy? Next slide, please. And so to orchestrate an alternative social engagement plan that accommodated a low lift approach through high yield posts, I tailored comments to the tone of the posts themselves on social media and specific comments that I replied to. In one example, I sympathized with a user who complained about their high insurance rate and shared facts from the reporting as to why their rate may be high. This strategy overall was less about driving clicks and more about sharing information from the newsroom onto these platforms. Now, looking at the feedback, I saw more replies or likes to the comments on TikTok. But overall, I believe that comments will promote the Markups brand anyway, and more people will likely see the Markups TikTok page as a result. And that may even lead users to leave the app and go onto their webpage as well. Next slide. So some takeaways. Ultimately, the effectiveness of this strategy depends on timing of said posts. So plan to follow and interact with creators whose content relates to the newsroom's focus. Identify recent TikToks so that they get an initial push into the platform's For You page, and your comments will as well. Now for Reddit, we recommend a domain search. This way you can search for your newsroom stories and see who else has posted about your newsroom on the platform. These Reddits then are likely a positive site to initiate engagement on. It also doesn't hurt to send the mods, also known as the moderators, a message saying how you plan to participate. And in conclusion, from this experiment, I found that commenting in the future can yield engagement between users and newsrooms, but more importantly, it does further the story's impact. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Sky. Again, one final time, if you have questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. One comment in the chat really liked that it was less about clicks and more about sharing information. And I liked how you explained that to Sky of how, okay, so if we kind of gain trust on TikTok or on Reddit, people then might go to our website or they might then go to TikTok, but really it's about kind of people seeing you as a trusted source, right?
Yep, and I was unaware of this prior to the internship, since I don't use social media a ton myself, but the comments are a huge site for more information exchange.
Yeah. One other question in the chat. Did you experiment or think about Facebook groups at all in addition to Reddit and TikTok?
Yes, we did think about Facebook groups. Ultimately, we couldn't execute that in time. But I was able to look at various Facebook groups related to Detroit and car insurance, and there seemed some really great conversations among Facebook users where sharing this information would have, I think, been very useful.
Great. I had a question about workflow. So when you go to comment on a specific post in Reddit or on TikTok, what did that look like for your team? Did you have to run that comment past an editor? Did you, like, who, in this case, you were responsible for that, but what did that workflow look like for a small team?
Yeah, so for a small team, we had a live document where everyone had access, and there were links to the TikTok posts or the subreddit and a draft of the comment. And so editors got to give us the thumbs up before we left those comments.
Great. Cool. One other question for you, Sky. Beyond doing a domain search, were there other good ways that you were able to find posts that were effective for commenting or starting conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. The domain search on TikTok is quite difficult to navigate. It's not like Google, so you have to be a little more creative about it. And to do that, we actually would just look at other users who were leaving comments as well, looking at other videos that they liked. So we were getting in the weeds, but we really wanted to be intentional with the posts we were commenting on, and curate a selection that we thought would have the most impact. So not just relying on the domain search, but also looking at other users, their liked posts, and so forth.
Yeah, and you'll find in Sky's piece, and this might be in the one that publishes soon, but that Sky recognized some specific keywords that you used when you were like searching for these posts. So that's a really good example for this specific story, how she took that story and then identified, all right, here are the words that I'm going to search for when I'm looking on Reddit or on TikTok or wherever I'm looking. And I found that really helpful. I had another question for you and it left my mind. I think it was, you know what, if it comes back to me, I'll ask you, Sky. Same goes for everyone else. If questions come up, I have just one more thing to say about the Student Innovation Fellowships. But as we're closing out, feel free to put questions in the chat. And Kat put my email in there as well. So if you have questions about the fellowship or about any of the students or would like to connect with any of our students, happy to answer any questions that way as well. But once again, our Student Innovation Fellowships, the applications will open up in October. And then the deadline is November 4th. And then the way it works is we start to notify students by the end of November, hopefully before everyone leaves on Thanksgiving break. And then we conduct interviews, both with students and with newsrooms, and we match the selected students with the newsrooms that we think will give them the best experience that matches both their needs, their interests, and their skills with what that newsroom is looking to do. So when newsrooms apply for the student fellowship, they are identifying specific projects that they want to work on. That being said, we do know that you're applying in October for a summer fellowship and things change quickly. So this just helps give us an idea of what are the kinds of projects that you're interested in, what are the main categories that you're interested in. I'm always happy to help brainstorm that as well. So if you are a newsroom and you're looking to apply, please feel free to reach out to me directly and we can talk through some of that. Same thing for students. Students apply and identify what they're interested in working on, what their experience is, and what they want to get out of the fellowship as well. So we have the link to that fellowship page that has a lot more information on it on the slides and in the chat. We'll also share that out after the call. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you so much to all of our Student Innovation Fellows who worked very hard this summer and have done some really wonderful work. Yes, kudos to you all. And please reach out if there's anything I can answer, anything I can do for you all. And that is all I have for you today. Thanks for joining.